Well, good morning. I'm Jeff Alberts, and I'm one of the seed advisors here at Unity Seeds. I have Steve Lytle with me here this morning, and he's also a seed advisor and a certified crop advisor. Steve, talk a bit about what we do here at Unity Seeds.
Thanks, Jeff. A top priority is to stay current on our agronomy knowledge base, and this is actually a requirement for the Certified Crop Advisor title. I use this knowledge along with a consultative approach with my customers to make specific recommendations for each American family farm within the 42 states that we distribute into. In contrast to the local guy or the farmer dealer, I can adapt more readily to changes in our farming environment to be more helpful and enhance the likelihood that our customers can maximize their profit potential. Along with our ability to make seed recommendations that make sense, there is a wealth of agronomy experience that can be even more fully utilized by Unity Seeds customers when our growers need us.
Sounds good, Steve. Along with the strong knowledge base, I know you place a high degree of importance in the best interest of your customers' operations in terms of profitability, all while working within some very strict ethical values. Tell us about our presentation today.
Well, today's webinar is entitled Nitrogen Management in Today's Environment, and will be presented by Dr. Howard Brown, who has served as adjunct assistant professor at the University of Illinois the past 15 years. He is a past chair of the International Certified Crop Advisor Board, and he serves on many other advisory groups that are involved in agriculture production and nutrient stewardship. Dr. Brown, we'd like to turn the program over to you now at this time.
Well, thank you, Steve. Can you hear me all right there?
Yes.
Yes, sound good.
Okay, great. Well, Steve, every time you introduce me, I'm sounding older all the time, so I'm just going to have to tell you that just say he's a good guy, and then we'll go forward. So thank you for the introduction. Well, I'd like to welcome everyone this morning, and I think the topic today is really kind of a critical topic, both from the standpoint of farm profitability and we want to look at it another way from a sustainability standpoint, because a lot of things are going on. And we need to, as we start today, I think it's very important that we start to work on the message of agriculture. And when we talk about the use of inputs, especially with nitrogen, with all the awareness and the elevated concern we have with things going on in the world today and in the United States, such as hypoxia in the Gulf, global warming, climate change, drinking water standards, and over in this area, eutrophication. So we need to keep this in mind, and so when we look at the use of inputs, specifically nitrogen, we must let everyone know that we're not only going to look at this through the lens of profitability, but we're also looking at it from the standpoint of accountability, and it's nothing new to agriculture, but we need to make sure that we focus on this and bring it to everyone's attention. So bottom line, it's going to take both accountability and profitability for us to make what we're doing today, use of inputs such as nitrogen fertilizers, sustainable. Now, I think the questions I would hope that you ask yourself today, listening in on the webinar, first off, if I was sitting with you, I'd ask you, how do you manage nitrogen? And then I would ask you, why do you do it that way? And then finally, if we could show a way to manage nitrogen differently to make it better for you, both from a productivity and a profitability standpoint, would you be interested in making the change? Now, if your answer to the last question is no, I have a problem because you don't want to talk to me. However, if you follow that flow, I think there's every farmer out there that wants to answer that last question, yes, I would make it better. The key is, will you make it better for me? So let's see if I can help. First off, I was at the annual meeting for the Agricultural Retailers Association in New Orleans last week, and the farmer panelist, one of the three, had this to say about his nitrogen management. He learned that he didn't need as much nitrogen last year, so he said, I only used 0.88 pounds of nitrogen per bushel this year so I can whittle down my inputs. Now, I was in that audience of 200 or so, and I wasn't about to raise my hand and send off the alarm signal for this fellow. But this, I have to say, he doesn't understand nitrogen, because last year it doesn't have very much to do with next year, because nitrogen is environmentally driven. 95% of the nitrogen you find in the soil is bound organically. That means it's not available to the plant. Only 5% or less is utilized by the plant. Now, that doesn't mean it's gone forever, but it means the biological engine drives the release, soil moisture and soil temperature. So I think this farmer needed a little coaching moment as to better understand nitrogen, because he used 0.88 pounds last year doesn't mean he'll use 0.88 pounds next year. In fact, next year he may need 1.2, and he's going to have a very disappointing year, not only from the standpoint of not making his yield, but with the present price of commodity, probably not making his target goals on profitability. So I always like to talk about, when I talk about production, I talk about it in relationship to the law of the minimum. And it's not like we just want to manage nitrogen and then move on. It's really managing everything together. And if some of you have ever had a chance to listen to a professor out of Illinois called Dr. Fred Below, he kind of come up with the concept of the 7 wonders of high-yielding corn a while back. And I've massaged Dr. Below's work, and really I can turn it into 5. And these are the 5. So we need to address these 5 aspects of growth all at the same time to optimize yield. And nitrogen, of course, is second to weather, and it's above genetics. We think we got this genetic thing pretty well fixed. As long as you out there keep using the technologies, keep going through Unity and buying the best genetics you can, because we deliver them. And it's really not just about genetics. We may make it, we feel that way sometimes, but really, everybody has good genetics or they wouldn't be in business. However, the Unity genetics you have is putting everything else in with it. So it's building the environment by which the genetics can best perform. And that's the secret. That's the mystery. So if you hang up right now, if you remember that point, and you work with your local ag retailer or whomever you buy your inputs from, or your consultant, go after these 5 all at the same time. Use common sense on their approach. Don't just buy stuff and throw it on the field. I know you don't want to do that. But if you look at common sense, use common sense in the approach, I think you'll find that doing these all at the same time will optimize production on your particular field. Now, I just want to set the stages. When we talk about nitrogen as a management system, where did that originally come from? Here's an example. This is an as-applied map. Now, you notice the 2 different stages of application. The bottom half of this map was put on pre-plant anhydrous ammonia. It rained. They couldn't put on the rest of the field. The rest of the field with the little circles, different color circles, that was applied post. That was after the crop was about 3 feet tall. And what's the difference between the 2? Well, there were 30 pounds down at the beginning. There was 164 pounds applied pre-plant anhydrous ammonia and 160 pounds applied on the other part of the field, post-applied when the corn's about 3 feet tall. Here's the outcome. The outcome where we pre-plant applied anhydrous ammonia, 193 bushels, where we post-applied urea treated with Agritane, and that's the source we had at the time, 214, 21 bushel difference. And look how uniform that 214 bushel is compared to the 193. You can almost see just to the line where we had post-applied versus pre-plant. So what this was the birth of was looking nitrogen differently than just an application, as looking at it as a system. This year was 2009, one of the wettest years on record, when it rains throughout the month of July, and it sent the signal we needed to do things different. So this made us look a little more at corn nitrogen uptake. And this graphic has been around the world a couple of times. This comes out of the Iowa State's Corn Growth and Development. Dr. Fred Below kind of recently revamped it, pretty much the same graphics, but he updated it. And as you can see there, the little mountains, the green is the nitrogen in the leaves, the yellow, the stalks and tassel, the blue, the cob, husk, and shank. Now, if you notice, they go up and down. Why do they go up and down? Because the plant uptake of nitrogen peaks at flowering. And if you'll notice, nitrogen uptake doesn't really start in any great volume until about 40 days after emergence. So if we're looking at nitrogen management, and we all know nitrogen, once we apply it in a warm, moist soil, converts to a form that kind of goes wherever water goes, or if your soils are saturated, it's lost into the atmosphere. So with that said, we need to watch what's going on. So 40 days is a long time. Can you imagine us, those out there that put nitrogen on in October the previous year? How much opportunity there could be for risk of loss. That doesn't mean we lose it, but that means there's a risk. So with this said, we need to manage nitrogen so that there's nitrogen in the plant so that at that peak uptake period of flowering, there's plenty of nitrogen to go in. And if you'll notice, everything else tapers off, but that yellow area continues to go up, and that's the grain. In fact, the plant needs so much nitrogen at that stage, it's not all coming in with water into the plant. Therefore, the plant is actually taking nitrogen out of the older tissues and moving it into the grain, and that's called remobilization. That is your formula for stock rot. The more that is remobilized early, the weaker the plant's going to be at the end of the year, the most likely the stalk rots will set in. So high yield potential means a lot of nitrogen moving into the grain and a higher risk of stalk rots. Leaf disease means less photosynthetic activity, less sugars getting into the plant, more nitrogen has to be remobilized, therefore stalk rot. So that is what we're describing as the yield. And really, higher yield sometimes is inversely related to standability. But from the standpoint, if we can keep that plant healthier longer by better utilization of nitrogen applied, we're all going to benefit. So here's just the facts. If you're looking at making nitrogen management recommendations or making a decision on how much to apply, these are factoids or things that really we have to know, and from research we know these do exist. First, nitrogen has to move into the plant with soil water. In fact, all nutrients have to move into the plant with water. No water, no nutrient movement. I can put 1,000 pounds of nitrogen between 2 corn rows, and if I didn't have moisture to move it in, the plants would fire. Secondly, when it rains, crop nitrogen can be shallow. Why? Because the water is there. Wherever the water is at, the water will move the nitrogen into the plant. 2009, wonderful example. I could have put all my nitrogen on the surface in 2009. The rain would have incorporated it, and it would have went into the plant, and I'd have been fine. Thirdly, when it doesn't rain, crop nitrogen uptake is deeper. Now, this is the one we need to look at a little differently, because this is saying that if you put all your nitrogen on the surface and it doesn't rain, we have a problem. Well, it's a great example. For example, in 1988, now hopefully some of you online were born and actively thriving and farming at that time. Maybe some of you weren't even thought of then. But in 1988, we had a drought, and it stopped raining after March 1st. When was the best time to put on nitrogen for the 1988 corn crop? The fall of 1987. Why? Because we put the nitrogen on into the lower part of the upper profile, and it nitrified, and then the water that sustained plants in 1988, any health at all, came from subsoil moisture. We had nitrogen in the subsoil moisture. When it went in, what nitrogen was there helped sustain a little better yield. Those farmers that side dressed in 1988 should have taken the investment and had their family go on vacation because they wasted their investment. Why? Because there was no moisture to get it in. Next, when applied early, the risk of loss is high. It doesn't take somebody with a lot of thought to understand if we put nitrogen on in September of the previous year, there's a good chance that we'll lose it before the plant utilizes it. So what do? We can manage that. We can use enhancements. We can delay the time of application. Fall applications can be managed to minimize the risk. However, there is risk. Now, the last one nobody talks about, and that's really the shame of agriculture today, is if it doesn't fit the model, let's not talk about it. Well, we need to talk about this. That means if every farmer would apply the nitrogen when it was going to be best utilized, side dress, we run a risk as well as suffering from yield loss. Now, why? Because of rain. The later we wait to put on the nitrogen, the more risk we run in not having significant rain events in order to get the nitrogen into the plant. So if you understand these 5 points, then you're set to make a nitrogen management system. Now, what is it? Well, let me put it this way. I know you all out there want to sell your grain at the highest price. Isn't that right? Well, you bet. But you can't because you don't know when that price will be. So you sell a little bit early, you sell a little bit in the middle, and then you sell a little bit late. You sell throughout the year. And that way you've hedged your economic risk and you have a pretty good price. Okay, well, let's look at nitrogen. You tell me when it's going to rain. I will tell you when to put all your nitrogen on, and I'll feel darn comfortable with that recommendation. If you cannot tell me when it's going to rain, however, I'm going to hedge my environmental risk. I'm going to put some nitrogen on early, and I'm going to knife it in myself because I want that nitrogen into that close to the subsurface moisture that sustains the plant if, unfortunately, we ever have another drought. Next, I'm going to put on part of my nitrogen pre-plant ahead of planting, and I'm going to broadcast it because I know that residue can immobilize nitrogen. And when the nitrogen is immobilized by residue, the plant cannot have it. Therefore, early in the season, we can actually end up with temporary nitrogen deficiencies, especially if we didn't get the tillage done this fall and we work the residue in next spring, or just simply having a cold, wet environment slows the soil's release. Therefore, I don't get enough to get started. So my pre-plant application, I'm going to broadcast it, and it's going to be about 25% of my nitrogen needs. Now, if I'm using starter fertilizer, I can forego that. And then finally, every acre I farm, I am going to post-apply nitrogen. And the reason I'm going to post-apply nitrogen is all my good efforts, putting it on early with enhancements to protect it, all my effort to pre-plant broadcast with enhancements to protect it. I could have a very wet April and early May as a result of losing the nitrogen either through leaching or denitrification. I want a part of my nitrogen recommendation left so I can sustain my plant and optimize my yield. I'm not putting on more nitrogen. I'm splitting my nitrogen up, and as a result of that, regardless of the environment, I've got to make that last application. Now, am I going to increase costs? You bet. In fact, I will estimate I'll increase costs between $15 and $25 per acre. But I wouldn't be talking this morning if I didn't know you'd get recovery. And in fact, we've shown recovery over the years from managing nitrogen differently from a one-time application to multiple. So it's not about increasing how much nitrogen we apply. It's about increasing how much is utilized by the plant. Here's what we've done. As you can see, 15 bushel average. Now you do the math. 1,000 acres, $7 a bushel. That may be a dream price. I don't know. Someday it may come back. But 1,000 acres, $7 a bushel at 15 bushels an acre. This particular farmer that had that kind of a scenario probably could have made him enough money to buy the applicator to post-apply his urea treated with Agritane from that point forward. So it's not just about environmental stewardship. It's also about the economics that drives the machine to make this kind of a change from a one-time application to multiple applications, a sustainable change for agriculture. So we call it a nitrogen management system, the right source, rate, time, and place. And you've heard about that. But we need to bring this to life. And so I look at it from the standpoint of a farmer. I recommend to you to have a nitrogen assessment. Look at what you're doing. Kind of take inventory of all the things you do. What do you believe? Do you allow for the MAP and the DAP nitrogen? Do you believe in a soybean credit? How have you been applying nitrogen over time? And sit down and just inventory everything that you're currently doing. How do you make your recommendation? And then see how we can change. And I think from the standpoint of how we change, it will be based upon your conversation with the people that you're working with. Now, so when we look at the verbiage that we need to be using, it's managing nutrients as a system, not an application. It's about losing less nutrients and utilizing more. It's about not only profitability, but accountability. And frankly, I look at it from the standpoint as these three individuals are illustrating with the old YMCA way of looking at things. It's about MOM, and that's minimizing environmental impact by optimizing harvest yield and maximizing nutrient utilization. That's what it's about. We need to capture the message of agriculture. I don't like to wake up in the morning and hear about hypoxia, global warming, climate change, drinking water standards, the state of Iowa or the city of Des Moines getting ready to sue the Iowa Department of Natural Resources because they're not maintaining the quality of water in Iowa. So if you want to think about a nitrogen management system, simply go to this website. It's www.illinoiscbnp.org. And we've built a really kind of cool calculator for the farmers to look at. Okay, he said it's going to cost more. How much more? Well, this website will allow you to put in your one-time application and compare it to splitting the nitrogen up over time. You just need the costs of production, the cost of your sources, the cost of your enhancements, and your application fee, and it will calculate out how much difference there is and how many bushels you will need in profit to pay or to make income or make money off of that kind of a system. And it's a simple website. I think it's kind of cool, of course, because I was involved a little bit, so I'm a little biased, but that's okay. So if you look at this website, you can actually put it in and save it so that you can refer to it for a later date. And here's just kind of an idea of what it's going to look like. You can have at the top, you have your single application, and then you have your split applications, up to 3 different splits. Now, when we talk about nitrogen, those of you that have the equipment, you have the yield monitors, the GPS, the RTK, you invested in that equipment for a reason, to help make management decisions. You didn't list it on your taxes as entertainment, right? So here's a way to utilize that simply by having an N-rate study. Now, some people start to cringe, thinking, oh, I don't want to deal with that. It's too much work. Well, here's an example. It looks pretty complicated, doesn't it? It has 6 rates, 3 replications. It's a big block out in the field. Was it hard? Not at all. Why? Because we allowed a controller on the toolbar or on the applicator to put in the treatments electronically. So all we did was hit a switch and let it go. Now, once we put these on, we saved it. Okay, now you're looking at a harvest map. The farmer's, your particular map, we gather that information. We lay over the top of that the treatments, as you can see in the upper right-hand corner. And then we go in and we have somebody strip out a line of data from the yield map that's within the treatment area. And once we have that, then we have a graphic to show what was the nitrogen response. So as a farmer, the only thing the farmer had done was to say, let's do it. Because the retailer made the map, the retailer told the controller, actually the retailer custom applied this nitrogen, the farmer gave them the yield data, and this is the outcome. So what did we learn? Well, this is just a simplistic way of looking at it, but really 50 pounds of nitrogen, he got 6 bushels for 50 pounds. So if you got $7 corn, pretty good deal at 50 cents a pound. However, if you got $4 corn, you're probably a break even in this particular year. Now, does that mean we make a decision on this for next year? No, but can you imagine having this every year for about 5 years? You no longer will think about using a figure like 1.2 times yield less credits. You're going to start thinking of your numbers over time. And isn't that what it's all about? Do you wake up in the morning and look in the mirror and say, I hope somebody treats me as an average farmer today? Well, believe me, that's how we make our recommendations. We don't have any better way to do it. But one way to do that is to utilize that investment you have in technologies and go out and start gathering your information and let us help you make those decisions. One other thing, just as I start to wrap up today, is how can we make all this come to life? Well, we've come up with a program called NWatch, and simply put, NWatch stands for a management tool that can inventory, track, and verify plant available nitrogen in the soil. And it's just utilizing an old soil test that we've had around for over 30 years, but we're using it in a different way. And this test allows us to watch the dynamics of plant available nitrogen, how it changes, where it's at, where it's not at, learn more about the behavior of nitrogen in the soil, because that's what it's about. Not only is it your second largest input cost, but it is also only second to environmental concerns to phosphorus. So we have a lot of interest into watching this and bringing it to life, and NWatch will allow that to happen. And NWatch provides information to help nitrogen management decisions. So when we look at what is NWatch, it's simply going out with the backsaver probe, and then an oxymoron. I've never found a probe that can be called a backsaver, but this one makes it less painful. We go down 1 foot sample, collect this composite, mix it, and send it in the lab, and then we go down to a 2nd foot and collect it, send it into the lab, and have it analyzed for nitrates and ammonia. We did this in over 400 sites in 2014, and we're looking to have well over that in 2015. And what we do is we just simply look at the nitrates, which is the red line, and the ammonium, which is the blue line, over time. And all those little triangles are sampling dates. And we watch what happens. The dashed line that you see there is 25 parts per million. That's how much nitrate nitrogen needs to be in that upper foot when the corn's 6 inches tall. And that's why we put it in there. Now the vertical blue lines, those are rain events. So we not only show nitrates and ammonium over time, but we also show them in relationship to rain events. So that if we get a lot of rain, like for example right here, this drop may be as a result of the rain event moving the nitrates further into the profile. So it's a lot of cool things. We don't have the answers. We can't give you the total interpretation of this, but what we can do is to provide you the tool and stand there with you to help you try to understand what the graphics are telling us. Now this is the second foot, of course, because we want to also watch, if we don't have it in the first foot, is it in the second foot? And here's a graphic. This is kind of cool. Do cover crops really help? Well, I'm a flatlander, so unless I have a reason to use a cover crop other than using a cover crop, I probably won't. However, if I want to use a cover crop as a flatlander, I'm going to use it to immobilize nitrogen and save it for my next crop if I can. And what this is showing you, we're using NWatch. In one field, we put on 100 pounds of, well, 120 pounds of nitrogen on covers that were established following wheat. So we had the covers well established, it's radishes and oats, and we put 120 pounds of nitrogen on the first part of October, and we started taking these tests. As you can see, we started taking the test the first part of October after we applied the nitrogen. And in the first graphic, you see that we have the blue line, which is ammonium, and the red line is nitrate. Well, at the end of October, the first part of November, there's nothing there on the left, either the first foot or the second foot. However, right next to it, where we had no cover crop, we took the cover crop off. Look at the nitrates. So what this is telling me is that putting on 120 pounds of nitrogen where I have a well-established cover, it's immobilized my nitrogen because it doesn't show up in my graphic. However, where there was no cover crop, I have a lot of nitrates. And remember what I said about the risk? The risk of losing this nitrogen is extremely high because it's a nitrate form and there's a lot of time between now and next June. So this tool helps me understand that, hey, cover crops do work. Now I have a reason in my economic reason in my farming enterprise to use a cover crop. Why? Because I can immobilize plant available nitrogen that may be there as residual. So let's say we have another drought and you have enough nitrogen to raise a crop of corn after harvest. I can put out a cover crop, immobilize it, and save a lot of that nitrogen for the next crop. Do I know when it's going to be released? I really don't, but I'll tell you what, why don't you ask me that same question next August, because I've got graphics that are going to show when nitrates go up and down next spring, and I think we'll find it then. So it gives us a tool to bring cover crops into the economic equation. Soil health is something I can't put my arms around. I can't put it into my bottom line, and when the corn price is low, I probably will not focus on soil health because it's not tangible. It may make us feel good, but we don't have any economic justification. This gives me economic justification for cover crops. So, you know, we don't like to look in the mirror and say, boy, I hope somebody treats me as average. You work with your Unity people, and they're going to treat you as an individual as they make the recommendations and help you pick those hybrids and varieties for what you need. It's all about messaging. It's about owning the message. Remember, it's about MOM. Minimize environmental impact, optimize harvest yield, maximize input utilization. As agriculture, we need to take ownership of that message and move forward so that we have the freedom to operate as we go. In Ohio here, your freedom is already somewhat limited because of what's happened in the past and the concerns, but we can still regain ownership if we can step up to the plate and show that we have the ability to be accountable as well as keeping our operations profitable. Create a message, share a message, and live the message. So with that said, that's pretty much all I have for this morning. I want to thank the Unity people for allowing me the opportunity to visit with you. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to address them, but thank you for the opportunity, and I'll turn it back over.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brown. We'll be going back to you in a moment for a Q&A session, and I encourage our audience to enter any questions into the question box that they may have. In the meantime, I'd like Jeff to tell us about the yield and profit potential of the Unity soybeans.
Unity soybeans had a great 2014 season in first trials. A couple of highlights include winning outright in the Howe, Indiana first trial by yielding in excess of 90 bushel per acre with our 3031 Roundup Ready 2 variety. 3303 Roundup Ready 2 yielded over 82 bushel per acre in the Wolcott, Indiana first trial. The average Unity advantage over these two locations in terms of profitability is roughly $90 per acre over the mean yield. Steve, what can you tell me about Unity seed corn?
Well, we were equally excited about our corn hybrids. Just for example, our 4814 Double Pro Refuge in the Bag came in second in outright yield in the 2014 Elverson, Pennsylvania first trial, and third overall in gross yield in the Spiceland, Indiana first trial out of 63 hybrids of various brands. Also, our 7914 3000 GT came in second place in outright yield in the 2014 Otterman, Indiana first trial, and fifth in yield in the 2014 Elverson, Pennsylvania first trials out of 54 hybrids overall. In 2014 first trials, Unity Seeds was the only brand to have 3 hybrids placed in the top 16 over the entire region summary for Indiana's central region. This would represent a sample of our recent accomplishments.
I agree that it is very important to consider recent accomplishments when making your seed purchasing decision. I also contend that performance over time is an important consideration. 5512 Smart Stack Refuge in a Bag has been providing more income for Unity Seeds growers for years. For example, 5512 came in second overall out of 63 in Otterburn, Indiana in the drought year of 2012. In 2013, 5512 yielded over 310 bushel per acre in the Greensburg, Indiana first trial, which was third in outright yield, and then placed fifth overall of 63 hybrids based on outright yield in that same Greensburg, Indiana first trial in 2014. As you can see, 5512 is a very consistent performer over the years and in some highly variable conditions as well. Let's see what we have for questions at this time.
Okay, yes, there are a few questions for today's presenter. Let's go with the first one. So far as how much yield can we lose if N is not available in the early growth stages of a corn plant?
Okay, and I think that's a good question. The yield loss is going, and you're going to probably guess what the answer will be, and it like always, it depends on the circumstances. But if we had, for example, a lot of residue worked in next spring and there was no broadcast nitrogen applied, it would depend upon the environment. If it's a cold, wet environment, what we'll end up with is poor early growth, and usually it'll come out of the ground, it'll look beautiful. When there's about 3 leaves on the plant, that is when the nodal root system kicks in. It leaves the food that's in the seed, it runs out, and then it relies on the surrounding environment. When it's about 3 leaves, that's when you start to see the effects of tillage, compaction, traffic patterns. The crop actually looks like it goes backwards. The degree that the crop looks like it goes backwards will be directly related to the amount of residual nitrogen in the soil. If you have 30 to 50 pounds broadcast, you probably won't even notice it, although all that's still there, but you won't see it. Now, as far as yield loss, if you don't lose sand, the corn should, as long as you have the nitrogen there, the corn should recover. And depend upon the degree. It may be uneven, it may pollinate a little different depending upon the stress that you have as a result of that. So it's all going to be focused on the environment that we have next spring, whether to the degree of impact on plant growth and development. It could be nothing, or it could be significant, depending upon how long it lasts before the plant finds the nitrogen.
Okay, great. This is a question in regard to one of your slides. In the yield trial for the 2009 with the early application and the side dress in the same field, was the same hybrid used in the whole field?
Yes, it was. The whole field was treated the same hybrid. The only thing was, in fact, this was a field that was actually agreed with the farmer that it would be custom applied by the ag retailer, and the ag retailer got rained out halfway through, and it wasn't until the corn was 3 feet tall that the weather was dry enough that allowed something to get back into the field, which was beyond the time they could still use the anhydrous ammonia applicator, and that's why we used urea treated with Agritain.
Okay, great. Here's another question. Would you recommend a cover crop with a manure application?
Okay, and I would need to know more about the operation. So let me paint the picture that I have in my mind when that comes up. If I'm a farmer with a lot of confinement or a lot of manure, you betcha. If I'm putting manure on the fields, there'd be no question. If I had the potential to put out a cover crop, that's the best scenario. In fact, I'll make the statement to whomever's online that this was not the year for a cover crop. Why? Because usually with a cover crop, if we look at all the nutrient reduction strategies, they use cover crops as a way to mitigate or minimize nitrate loading. Well, I'm here to say that based off NWatch, there wasn't any nitrates in the profile come harvest time unless you had something like manure. So for those farmers to have put a cover crop on after harvest this year, which is a very narrow window, in my opinion, they should have probably put on 50 to 100 pounds of nitrogen just to get it started. Now, that doesn't make it an economic decision, maybe. I don't know. It's up to them. But if I had manure, I'm driving that machine all the time. So, yes, I would, if I had the capacity, you bet I'd put a cover crop on my fields that were manured. The other thing I advise those farmers to do is to seriously look at NWatch and just visit with your Unity seed dealer, even your ag retailers. If they don't know, find out about it. But NWatch would allow you to kind of send up set off the alarm in case you're loading the soil with nitrogen that you don't know about, because someday somebody's going to look at that and they're going to find it in the tile water and they're going to trace you back upstream, and I'd rather you know about it now than later.
Okay, we have one last question, and that would be, would a later flowering hybrid respond better to a later in application?
Boy, I wish I was that smart. I really do. If I could offer advice, if I were farming, I would be picking my hybrids for the time to flowering. So if you're in the same maturity zone and you had a choice between a couple of hybrids, I would stretch my pollination period. I don't think we worry too much about that, because even the same hybrid in the same field, they don't all germinate exactly at the same time. So although one particular corn plant will shed pollen probably 3 to 7 days maximum. That's the maximum pollen shed. Since some of the timing's a little off, that period of pollen availability is a little greater than that. But as far as nitrogen management and hybrids, I think I'm from the school that the environment is the trump card, and we really, I think, amuse ourselves sometimes into thinking we were managing nitrogen for racehorses and workhorses and all this, and that's fine. I'm sure there's a lot of smarter people than me out there that can do that for you.
Okay, with that said, Steve, it's yours now.
Thank you again, Dr. Brown. We heard you loud and clear when you said nitrogen should be managed as a system rather than just an application. And here at Unity Seeds, we feel accountability and profitability on the American Family Farm are very important to consider as we work with our customers to assist them with their seed purchases. Our next webinar will be in January of 2015. Please check out our website and watch for topics and dates at unityseeds.com. Remember to call one of our seed advisors at 800-338-4558 for seed recommendations, and be sure to plant Unity seeds for top value in your 2015 seed investment. Thank you.
Thank you, and that concludes today's webinar.